episode 7. And this is where we're at. So this episode will be about greatest hits compilations and why I think they're the work of the devil. No, I just don't have respect for them. And it's strange because you would think, what's wrong with them? I'm going to discuss a few of them and the pattern I seem to notice with them and the general issue overall. Now, I want to explain that greatest hits I don't view in the same light as somebody archiving the material, a recording artist archiving the material, or do I framework it in the same way as an anthology? Because I think those two things are separate from a greatest hits. With that said, I'm going to address something that has been brought to my attention, and I would like to add clarity to this. Right? So I know over the last 6 episodes, and sometimes in the first season, I make mention to this, but I'm actually going to formally say most of this stuff is based on my opinion, my assessment, and my speculation based on general common sense approach. I usually report from my history, coming up, looking at things, analyzing things. There's been decisions and forecasting I've done on a societal level, even on an individual level, like with people that have asked me for assistance over the years. There's been several people, right? Probably at this point in time, I would imagine in the thousands, right? There was a period of time somebody actually wanted me to be a life coach. Now, this is way back in the day before the concept of life coach is what it is now, a fucking circus. And it's weird because back then, I had a hard time understanding how somebody could do that. Because it was before, I think, licensure. Licensure exists, and I think in certain states now for it. So anyway, which way. So most of the stuff I do is by gathering information, analyzing the information, thinking about, correlation, causation, looking back at things in hindsight, past, present, future, past, present, forecast the future, as best as possible, right? So most of this is speculative. Now, my accuracy is pretty good, to my understanding. I know it's like, yeah, of course you think your accuracy is great. You fucking egotist, right? It is what it is, right? One perceives themselves the way they do. I've gotten a lot of good feedback. I've had people hit me up with ideas here and there. So I have to base it on the people I'm interacting with. And the repeat customers, if I look at them as customers, I don't necessarily look at them as customers. In all honesty, typically how I decide if I'm going to assist something is based on whether the person actually really requires the assistance or it's just encouragement. Because sometimes it's just that. So when I'm going to speculate on ideas and things I've seen and analyzed, some of them are going to be fact. This is data that's already collected and it's already been presented. Some of it is going to be speculative based on what I'm looking at, right? And I'm literally going by the model of inner core, outer core conspiracy theory. And what outer core is closer to truth than not, right? If there's enough things pointing that this is a high possibility, this is a thing, then I'm going to go in that direction. I'm not going to give you inner core stuff. I'm not going to give you some weird ass fucking pizza place somewhere that people think bad things are happening in some basement that doesn't exist. I'm not ever going to do that because that's fucking crazy, right? If I'm doing that, it's under the guise of fiction because that's closer to fiction than not. It is speculative what I'm presenting because it's based on just analysis. And sometimes analysis creates patterns, right? And when you look at things sometimes, they don't necessarily want to give you the data. So outer core conspiracy theory kind of makes sense because it's not enough evidence to support or people right out saying it, but it's definitely implied, and it definitely shows up through actions. So you can simply reverse engineer the actions, and that's where speculation comes in. And speculation, in my opinion, as long as it's not fringe and crazy, and you really cannot see it. Like, I'm not going to talk to you about fucking aliens and fucking weird shit. I mean, I've seen weird shit in my life, but that doesn't make it so. It's perception. It is what it is. Like, it's like, okay, that's a thing. I'm not going to dive down that fucking rabbit hole. Don't care enough about it to actually want to do that. Right? Like lizard people and all that. Don't give a fuck about any of that. Right? I like the here and now and the shit that makes sense in society as we're seeing it. Right? That's how it appeals to me. And what I'm going to tell you, I'm going to lay out the groundwork right now for this. If I'm speculating, I'm going to basically continue to keep communicating that I am. So you understand. I'm going to try my best to apply the scientific method, right? So this is a hypothesis. This is an educated guess, right? And educated guesses mean that there's a high probability, I'm at maybe like 5 to 10% chance this is a thing, right? If I'm thinking it's a theory, it has to be past 50% mark. There's enough evidence, enough stuff that works to support this than against it, right? And that's where I have a working theory. This is why I also have a problem with film breakdowns. Like, this is an Easter egg, a theory, and it doesn't make it so, right? Theories are things that could be replicated again, based on the same situation, right? Hypothesis is the thing, like you can have an educated guess that elephants are running the world, right? That's inequality conspiracy theory, but it's no better than, it's just a general, just a claim. And then you do just a little gathering of data and you realize that's bullshit, right? So I have a tendency to not like bullshit in life. And there's enough through advertisement, through the corporate end, through the idea of social media, there's a lot of bullshit. And I'm stating all this right now so you will understand where I'm at in regards to how I'm presenting information. Right? All this shit's based on my opinion. But there's certain things that actually exist. Like, the one famous one is the George H.G. Wells War of the Worlds, and Orson Welles recording it. Prior to that, there was no station ID, or it was infrequent. They left it off during the recording, and people freaked out because it was nationally broadcast. But I'll state that, and then I'll tell you, there's a good probability that they learned that the companies that were broadcasting that, or the people that listened to it, or the people that on a higher echelon of finances, learned something from that. Obviously, the breakdowns in the radio hour, the top of the hour, half past, like 20 after, 40 of, like that's, some of them are optional, some of them aren't. They established that because of that, in response to that, right? I'm also explaining to you that when I say to you that news holes, N-E-W-S, holes, right, are designed from the latter half of the 19th century. It was when they restructured the way news is being told during sensationalist, news structure, the idea of man bites dog. This is all fact. This happened, right? So if I'm going to speculate, it's going to be based on something that actually is a thing that you can see replicate itself in our society, right? I've read a lot of books. I've collected a lot of data. I have college under my belt, so it's not like I'm making this shit up. But I will tell you that some of it's my opinions. There is a future episode coming up, and this is why I'm telling you this, in regards to employee-based economy. Because I honestly don't know how it affects the rest of the country. I only know my experience. And I could see it happening before it actually happened. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's targeted heavily in the next 3 years. That sounds like ominous, but it's a future episode. Next 2 episodes are going to be 7 and 8. One is about lost movies. That's number 8. This is about greatest hits compilations. And it's interesting because what I'm painting for you slowly is how the business hand fucking with the art hand. And it's weird because they can have a symbiotic relationship. Again, it seems like I'm anti-corporation. I'm really not. I don't like corporations having personhood. I'm not a big fan of that, right? It was haphazard. It happened. We've been dealing with the ramifications of it since, right? I could get into that. What introduced me to this idea was actually Shannon Wheeler in Too Much Coffee Man, when the comic book went from the comic book structure to the magazine structure. And if you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's cheeky. I like the comic strip. I like the material he generates. It's really kind of cool. So over time, this was brought to my attention. What was weird is I remember reading about Air Pirates, which is another comic book. How do I say this? I don't necessarily favor those type of books, but it's like it's a comic book from the 70s that spoofs Mickey Mouse and has him in these weird sexual things. It's funny for that day, understanding that culture. You know, the Days of Fritz the Cat and all that whatnot. It's cheeky, right? But at the same point in time, I know Disney sued the guy for it back in the day. That actually happened. So when Shannon Wheeler decided to do a parody of Starbucks, he got sued by Starbucks. And what came to light was the personhood that each company has. Now, I'm dead against that. But I'm not against the idea of corporations in the sense that they can exist as an agency. Because, okay, we have capitalism. It's a driving structure. I do believe capitalist and social structures can exist really well together and do good for everybody across the board. That's my perspective on things, right? I also know that they can work symbiotically, because they have at various points in time, right? So I'm not necessarily 100% against that. My problem is the bleeding of stones, the profit for the sake of profit, to push things in a direction that doesn't make any sense, thus explaining this episode. Now, it comes to my critique of a lot of things. It goes for the majority, not for the minority. There is Deja Vu, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young kind of makes sense because there's extra songs added to it. It's a greatest hits kind of compilation. Compilations kind of make sense, especially if you're in the market where way back in the day, like back in the 40s and 50s when they were doing records, some artists had 45s or 7 inches, and they would release these pieces, like sometimes 2 songs, sometimes 3 songs, and they didn't necessarily have them in an album. So after a period of time, a compilation would come out. Kind of makes sense. My critique is more or less of the greatest hits albums that seem to be just a fucking money grab. And it's strange because to me it's unwarranted. Like if a person's putting out a greatest hits album, all you're focusing on is lightning rod pieces. I'll give you an example of this. If you're releasing a Van Halen greatest hits, which there's several, right? They're not my examples, but I'll give you an example. Atomic Punk exists on the first album. It is a dope fucking song, right? Most of the first album, the majority of the first album, actually all of the first album, it's on my top 100 best albums of all time, is strong. It's a great album, right? But Running with the Devil, right, will exist on the compilation, but Atomic Punk won't. Actually, Atomic Punk doesn't even get played on the radio typically. I've requested it from several different radio stations over the years. Doesn't happen. So it's kind of one of those weird hidden gems. And typically greatest hits albums wouldn't have it. Right? So that right there is a critique, just general critique. What the fuck? And in my opinion, certain bands don't require the greatest hits. I'll give you a good example. Nirvana does not require a greatest hits album. Just because you have a new song doesn't require you to go through the very small catalog of Nirvana albums that all work to give you a greatest hits compilation. It didn't make any sense. Now, granted, there was a box set that made sense, right? And even the Montage of Heck soundtrack for the documentary made sense. But a greatest hits album for Nirvana seems kind of dumb. You can feel a tightening hand of just the fucking stone as the flesh gives way, just to bleed it out, not realizing it's your own blood, you fucking idiot. So, You Know You're Right was released in the 21st century, and it was a polished off song. Here's what's funny. I don't even mind the deluxe versions of the albums. I kind of understand them, because they're usually accompanied with unreleased tracks, demo tracks, which are alternate takes, which are valid. All live concerts. It kind of makes sense, right? So if you're interested in furthering that catalog, so be it. Actually, it would make more sense, especially for the live albums, to release a live variant, right? That would make sense too. But to release a greatest hits album from a band that has 4 albums, 3 studio and 1 compilation, doesn't make any sense. It's fucking stupid, right? Well, it made some sense. Different sense, sir, ma'am, whatever. You have Bleach, Nevermind, In Utero, or In Utero, whatever you want to say. And you have Incesticide, which is a compilation. Okay? You can actually just treat that as the normal discography. You didn't need Nirvana. You have With the Lights Out as a box set, which is a collection of everything. Stuff from compilations, stuff from soundtracks, alternate takes of things. Kind of makes sense. Rough recordings, earlier recordings. That made sense. I understood that. And that was reasonably priced when it first came out. You can get it anywhere from $25 to $30. But it's like 3 discs and I think a DVD came with it, right? Decent box set too. Nice design. The live album doesn't make any sense. The stripped down version of the box set as 1 disc CD, then why have the box set? That didn't make sense either. That's just, let's see how much money we can get this out of all of this. Okay, the albums are going to constantly sell. You put them in rotation, they affected many people. So they're constantly going to sell. So that is an example of cash grab. Money. And it's also, as a person that listens to music, it doesn't make any fucking sense to buy it. It doesn't. Like, it's probably more respectful to have the 45 with the extra song. Right? But the band only has 4 albums. 4. Doesn't make any sense. You could have actually, what would have made sense if you didn't want to go to the full box set, right? You didn't want to release all the rough recordings. Realistically, I don't mind that. That makes sense to me. But let's say if you wanted to do a B-side and rarities, which makes sense, right? That's a thing. And you did a bonus edition. Or you named the B-side and rarities with Lights Out. And you did the full box set version and the other version, right? It kind of makes sense. The box set's limited. The standard compilation is what is going to be perpetually repeated, sold it over and over again. Kind of makes sense. But the money grab after the fact, when the box set still exists and you still can get it, didn't make any sense. Just saying. It's critique. I'm consuming your product. I love the band. It is what it is. Now, granted, they're not like the end-all of end-all, but they were definitely significant. So I'll give you another example. Beastie Boys have basically two greatest hits albums, the Solid Gold Hits and the Beastie Boys music. Right? Currently, I think the Beastie Boys music is the one that's circulating around. I'm pretty sure you can get the other one that was hanging out for a while. Beastie Boys all together have an interesting discography, right? So they have 8 albums. I put them in a specific order just for my preference, but they have 8 albums altogether. But they also have some notable compilations. They have Same Old Bullshit, which is a compilations of all the punk rock stuff and hardcore stuff they did prior to License to Ill. Right? They didn't sound from Way Out, which is basically a compilation of different jazz music interludes that they did. And what's weird is there's actually a follow-up album to that that's completely all original, The Mix-Up. It's interesting because a lot of people don't realize there's a jazz component to the Beastie Boys, right? Especially ones that just listen to Fight for Your Right to Party 100,000 fucking times. Because you know, that song is going to be on those greatest hits because God for fucking bid, right? They don't have strong albums, right? We'll ignore that. So then there's an EP called Aglio, right? And that is their version of modern hardcore after being grown up. Like, they come out in 95. I advise it. It's definitely notable. So those 8 albums plus those 3 kind of make up the large compilation. It's interesting because it's all together pretty much 11-piece. They're warranted. Whereas the greatest hits albums are strange because, like, in the Solid Gold, if I remember this correctly, they derived most of the music from License to Ill. All these albums, now granted, License to Ill is definitely a masterpiece for its period of time. I don't have it ranked as my number 1. I have Paul's Boutique. Maybe I have a bias. Ranked as number 1 because it's probably the most experimental. And there's a lot of, nods to other music. License to Ill Communication, Check Your Head, like top 4. Check Your Head and Ill Communication are kind of like bookends to definitely an era. My number 5 is actually The Mix-Up. It actually got on my list of the 21st century, some of the best albums of the 21st century. More so than Hot Sauce Committee, too. Now, granted, Hot Sauce Committee is shadowed by unfortunate death of MCA, but I really like the jazz album. I thought it was really interesting. Hello Nasty would probably be number 6 on my list, and To the Flower Burrow is probably number 8. I own all these pieces all together. I collected them as time went on. Sometimes I rebought them, especially with the Aglio. I found owning that on vinyl to be interesting. Yes, records. I've always bought records. For me, records never went away. To the general public, they did. They're like, "Oh, what is this? This piece of plastic. What is on this plastic?" And that's people that challenge with that. For me, if you actually went to music shops, boutiques, they still had vinyl. They were still being printed. Certain artists decided to let them be released as the CDs were being released or the stream, whatever nonsense format that you have, right? The only format I had kind of like a weird distaste for, but yeah, I didn't necessarily mind owning because they were cheap with cassettes. The idea of bringing back cassettes just horrifies me. Seriously, I'm not going to lie. Fuck cassettes. So it's weird because the compilations, they both kind of generate this really weird structure from the albums that you should just fucking buy. Seriously, like, you should just buy the fucking album. Like, Why not own the Beastie? Well, 'cause I just want Sabotage. Didn't listen to the fucking radio because it's on the radio a lot, right? I'm gonna reference these albums. I'm gonna reference Beastie Boys at some other point in time because there is an interesting point in history, music history, listening to the radio, and I'm gonna constantly reference listening to the radio for a speculative idea, thus explaining why I began this whole recording today. So, in my opinion, okay, you can get the solid gold hits, Beastie Boys music. I think if you're just shopping around for Beastie Boys and you just want just the general hits, just fucking buy the albums. Like, even if you don't buy To the Fire Burrows, okay? Even if you don't buy Hot Sauce Community, which should have been a really big album. There's a lot of good songs on it. Hello Nasty was like a whole fucking world change. Just a shift, a hard shift in a different direction. I applauded that when it came out. I'm like, this is so fucking interesting, right? Because it broke out of the initial mold, the bookend of Check Your Head and Ill Communication. But I guarantee you, if you buy a License to Ill, Paul's Boutique, Check Your Head, Ill Communication, you will feel like there's a lot of other material that was never released. I'd be like, no fucking shit. You're too busy listening to the fucking greatest hits or listen to the goddamn radio. Right? Certain stations back in the day, especially for Check Your Head, used to play alternate tracks. Like the Maestro, or Professor Booty, or Blue Nun. What's the second song to that? The track after Blue Nun. I can't remember the name of it right now. Stand Together, I think that's the name of it. That segued right. I remember BRU playing that in New England. That's just a thing. It was a beloved album. I remember going to the concert. Yes, I went to the concert. Unlike some people, I've been to several shows. I still go to them because I like concerts, right? So when I seen them live, I was just thinking to myself, like, there's so many fucking people in this room for a supposed defunct band, right? Because at the time they were acting like they just don't. Paul's Boutique fucked everything up. Your mismanagement of putting out singles and focusing on an album was the problem with that album, not the album itself. Okay? Because understand, Paul's Boutique was, I think, released on Capitol. It wasn't part of Def Jam. Def Jam was the License to Ill. They had a falling out. I'm not going to get into that. Don't give a fuck enough about it to get into it. I know there's enough songs on Def Jam to basically release a compilation at some point in time, which would be notable. That would make more sense to release that than give us solid gold hits or Beastie Boys music. Just get the fucking albums. Now, granted, it's a lot. I'll tell you, the four I listed off, grab them. If you like them, you're more likely going to like the other four. It's fucking layup, right? So, let me go on to the next one. The next one is ZZ Top. And I decided to go, I'm a weird dude, right? So I like the older music. I like ZZ Top, right? Now, I like ZZ Top enough to remember listening to Eliminator when I was young, because my parents owned it, and thinking to myself, there's something wrong with this album, right? You're like, because they're silly. No, I think the album has like a schizophrenic shift. The only other album while listening to music that I felt the same way with was Ixnay and Ombre by The Offspring. First major label debut, right? And I was just thinking to myself, some of it is just classic ZZ Top, and some of it is this really weird, fucked up, polished version of them. Like this too much sugar got released in this situation to clean it up in a very fucked up way. And they become hokey and weird for quite a few years. They eventually get back to basics at some point in time. I think Antenna maybe was the album. And the later on stuff is dope. I know I've gone into debates on ZZ Top. Their electric blues, like basically rooted in blues structure. I don't necessarily put them as Southern rock fucking category, even though they come from the South. Like, I don't put them in that category. Just don't. I same category as I put in several other bands, like Canned Heat. Same basic idea. I don't necessarily agree with all the categories either. I will fucking say what I say. You want to take it, run with it, cool. If you don't, okay. If you want to bitch about it and argue with me and think we're going to get into long, heated debate about it, no, I don't give a fuck. Sorry. It's funny because some people are like, dude, I'm going to read the comments. I'm like, good. And you want to make jokes about them? Make jokes about them. So anyway, so let's get down to ZZ Top. ZZ Top has the best of ZZ Top and the greatest hits. Now, I can honestly say one improvement is that the best of covers a specific range of time. So certain greatest hits albums do this, but I still think it's kind of cheap. It's kind of weird. Like, because what happens is with the greatest hits, you end up sacrificing a lot. And sometimes coupling songs and eras of albums with the past music. And sometimes the previous music stands really well by itself, right? So ZZ Top has 15 albums altogether. I've owned 7 of them. If I include Eliminator, I can guess 8. I've listened to the last Triple X, Antenna, and I think La Futura, right? I'm pretty sure those are the ones I've listened to after the fact. I didn't mind them. I thought they were pretty good. Anyway, so the push for this, I guess, kind of makes sense from the idea of wanting to power grab money off the singles. But here's what's weird. So if the person buys these greatest hits albums, they kind of miss on the really strong albums. Like Tres Hombres is really, really fucking good. So why wouldn't you buy that album? Right? And by buying the album, you end up fucking up the greatest hits piece because there's a bunch of songs that come from that, right? So it's great. The first album I've listened to. I've owned for a period of time. I had it on cassette at some point. I like the album. It doesn't sound like the later albums as much. But in this situation, if you're shopping around for the greatest hits, then I guess you're just a person that just likes to listen to random songs from the radio. So you're not necessarily a fan, but here's what's weird. How do you make that transition? Like, is it a sampler? But if that's the case, you're listening to the radio. Again, this is just, we know these singles because we have them in rotation. We get money and profit for them being in rotation, right? We're not necessarily going to play Blue Jean Blues on the radio. It does get paid on the radio every so often. I'll catch it like once a decade on some random station. Usually when it's kind of dope. Like, so I'm in Pittsburgh area. So 103.1 has KVE. I expect it on that because there's been usually a lot. The selection on that station is unusual because they always get these different types of tracks. DV, when I first arrived here, was similar, kind of similar, not exactly the same. So you do have stations to do that. Then, okay, so the greatest is that's for you. I guess. I don't know. I look at it as a large money grab. In my opinion, with bands like these, an anthology would work better. And that's what I'm probably going to get into at the end. There's one other artist I want to bring up because I think it's fucking hilarious. That artist is the Fugees. Now, the Fugees have 2 releases. Blunted on Reality and The Score. Everybody knows The Score because that broke into pop culture echelon, right? Blunted on Reality is really good too. But it's some of those things, like everybody likes the first album, so sometimes the second album always makes the most money. That works. That works across the board. Sometimes companies don't realize how much of a big deal an album was, or a movie was, or a product was until the selling of the next product, the sequel, or the follow-up, or whatever it may be. Then they're really confused when it makes a fuckload of money, like buckets of money. One of the quickest examples I can think of off the top of my head was Beck. When ODLA came out, it was like, what? Like, this thing's making a fuckload of money, right? Dude, he put the work in. The albums he released prior to ODLA are amazing. I'll eventually cover them at some point. So if you were venturing through his catalog, which most was released in 94, 93, 94, ODLA seemed like a no-brainer. Like, you expected it to be really good. And it was. And it made a lot of money and kind of fucked up the mainstream for a little while. Because at the time, they were trying to framework him as a one-hit wonder with the song Loser. Any which way, guess who has a greatest hits album with only 2 albums? The Fugees. Does that shit make any fucking sense? A compilation of B-sides and rarities remixes makes sense. A remix album makes sense, right? A greatest hits album of a band that only has 2 fucking records. 2 records. Just go buy the 2 fucking records. Really? You cheap motherfucker, right? If you're that hot up, go to a fucking used record store, right? But wait a second. Corporations don't make money off of that as much as they make money off. Yeah, there you go. Because who is it? Who's making the most money? Right? They're making the royalty checks, but who's making the most money? Off the recovered Nick. Yeah. So with the remixed piece, I'll give you an example of that. Block Party and Deftones. I know I mentioned Deftones already. Deftones did the 20th anniversary edition Black Stallion. I already said this, but I'll reiterate it again. This is a different episode. That made sense. I understood that. And it's actually sold separately to a certain degree. I'm pretty sure I did physically see a copy of that. So, Silent Alarm by Block Party was sold separately. Right? So you got the Silent Alarm normal release, and then it was similar covers of Docker, right? And the remix. Both of them are really fucking good. They can stand on they're on my top over 200 list, 21st century albums, right? Whereas Deftones' Black Stallion, even though it's sold separately after a certain point, White Stallion was the anniversary piece. You can get the double album piece with that. That makes sense. I can understand somebody going back and like when CeeLo Green did Footprints, when they did the anniversary edition of A Tribe Called Quest's first album, right? That made sense. I understand that, right? That's not what's happening here. We're taking tracks that we know are moneymakers, compiling them all together just to maximize our profits. What I'm suggesting is that they're watering down the fucking product. And they're just giving you the thrills, the peaks. And what's weird is there's better peaks sometimes on the vinyl, on the original release. So why not just buy the original release? Fuck those goddamn greatest hits. Fuck them damn to hell. Because it really is genuine money grab. You know, in the case of ZZ Top, I'm going to argue this. So, with that said, it's pretty clear I fucking don't like greatest hits albums. However, I'm going to tell you what I do like. I know it's like, oh, I'm sitting here for Paul's fucking angry fucking rhetoric. It's not really that angry, but, you know, because whatever, you know, fill in the blank. Fucking comments, read them, have fun with them. I do think archiving and having nods and respects in a retrospective that's done well could work. Neil Young is archiving his stuff, right? Bob Dylan's had the bootleg series going for a period of time. I don't even know which one it's up to right now. And that makes sense because there's so many variations of these songs. So when an artist is basically compiling this stuff, and they have to be involved, like to me that's because they know what fans want. And I don't necessarily thinking they're going to do the money grab. They're going to get paid for this act. But they also get paid again for helping compile the collection. And usually when they do that, they're like, we want to give something to the fans. Like, we really want to bang this idea out. So instead of buying, I'll give you an example, the Beastie Boys Greatest Hits. Waste of fucking money. Go buy the anthology. The anthology is pedigreed. It's designed to definitely hit home with the fans. It collects a lot of the stuff, a lot of the B-sides, rarities, remixes, Intergalactic, right? It presents sometimes new material, like maybe we had a single, let's throw a single onto there. That is more suitable to be respectful. You can add it to your collection. It seems to supplement your collection rather than try to summarize it. And that's the fucking headache, right? You know there's love put into it. The designs of the packaging are usually dope as fuck, right? Like with the lights out, like I said to you. It's kind of a cool design. I respected it for that. Deftones' White Pony release, 20th anniversary release, kind of cool, right? So the Beastie Boys anthology, Sounds of Science, that's what it's named, has a great cover by Biz Markie of an Elton John song with the Beastie Boys, Benny and the Jets. It probably existed on like a B-side or a EP, a limited release EP at some point in time, but it's on the anthology. So it's a supplemental piece to the collection. Again, makes sense. ZZ Top, I don't know if they have one. I didn't look at that. But them stepping in at some point in time to do a large anthology piece, they have 15 fucking albums. And I guarantee you a shitload of recordings after the fact. They can probably do that. And it would be warranted. It would be something I would go, let me check this out. Jimi Hendrix, posthumous, released West Coast Seattle Boy. And that is worth owning because it's a vast collection of his work with other people before as a gig person prior to the experience. Prior to him getting his foot, unfortunately, again, he had to go to England. Kind of sad, but that's how fucking America does things sometimes. So that's worth owning. That's supplementary to the thing. The random releases of live albums. I mean, you can say, well, that's yeah. Well, sometimes the different recordings, different variations of the recordings, right? Again, Bob Dylan has a vast collection of these greatest hits, volume 1, 2, 3. Bootlegs that release all of the versions of the songs from earlier on at various points in time as you're recording. Because these artists, if they're active, they're doing a lot of interesting shit, right? The stuff you get in the final product is addition to. Now, if you're not that deep into an artist, I can kind of understand you not getting them, right? And getting the continuous albums. But if you're fishing around enough to buy greatest hits, that means you probably like them. So why not just find the starter album? Because that's usually what drives it. Like, people, I know, like when I introduce them to a different band, I'll usually get them the album that kind of sells the idea, right? So if I'm going to get NoFX, I'll get So Long Thanks for All the Shoes, right? There you go. Neapolitan cover. There you go. That's the album, right? That's the album sold me. Because why that album particularly? Because there's a large range of stuff going on in that album. There's definitely experimenting with recording. There's a decent, strong cover. There's probably one of the best, the Cell single of NoFX is on that album. Eat the Meek. If it's ZZ Top, I'm going to go Trey Ambras, right? There you go. That's the album. They'll be like, oh shit, this thing's fucking dope. Like, yeah. Again, label kind of money grabbing. More so, it's interesting because, so when you look back at rock history is probably the best history to look at because, especially for popular music. Actually, right now, slight sidebar. Popular music means the music that is favored by a certain percentage of the population. However, popular music is also formulaic music, meaning that it's designed, cultivated, and engineered by the business hand to get the larger audience. There's two different levels of popular music. There's popular music that breaks in to the mainstream. It becomes popular because of word of mouth. And there's popular music that's designed to grab the money. That's why popular music gets such a negative connotation. Take that in consideration. Because I know I've watched grown men debate this. I've watched people talk about this over the years. And the best example I can give you is the Madonna model. Because I genuinely think at some point in time, she was talented enough to want to helm a band. She did. Think Crazy on You, Crazy for You, something like that. I'm thinking I'm confusing that with the Heart song title. Vision Quest, the song that was in Vision Quest, is like the clear, it's pop, but it's like you get the better understanding of her with a band than you do the later music. And my critique of her, I'm not a big fan at all, okay, is that she kind of followed that model upwards. I wasn't even a big fan from like way back in the day, like when she first debuted. So it's not like I just, oh, you hated Madonna over the years. No, it just, initially I'm like watching this person going, why am I supposed to like this? And I realize I'm not the demographic. And I'm realizing that she has the fan base she has, kind of. Like I know she lost a lot of them. Okay? I don't care how old you are right now, trying to double down on Madonna right now. I know sometime in the late 90s, she kind of, a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm kind of done with you. Right? But she's the good example of that really weird sugaring model. Right? And there's several bands that fall into this model. I'm just using her as an example right now. So some pop music is designed by the corporate hand, by the labels, and by their talent pool they have, just for the sole purpose to sell to the masses. And when they mean the masses, they mean the Midwest. Because what's interesting about the Midwest is it's more glassed off than the areas that are really old. They kind of have a petri dish effect on them. I'm on the gateway of that right now, and it took me a while to understand that, because the outliers, the radicals, the ones that listen to the metal and all that stuff, that would show up in major metropolitans would think they're the shit, and all of a sudden they realize I've only chipped the tip of the iceberg when it comes to music. Yes, right. Every so often you'll find a savvy one, but for the most part, I was hearing that their programming, that certain areas and certain towns they lived in didn't allow certain things through. And I know it's been commented on over the years by different musical artists and different artists in general, right? There's a famous David Bowie interview. And he constructs it as race and whatever. And it is. That's a component of it. But I also think is the idea of like thinking about a band like, I don't know, Metallica back in the 80s. That being introduced to the natural pull of music on radio would freak people the fuck out, right? Well, that's the idea you're coming up with. For me, it wouldn't. That's just a no-brainer, right? And it's weird because the one gravitas, one tip of the hat I'll give to fucking Guns N' Roses is that they kind of did that. Now you can't get that first fucking album not being played, right? But it grinded a lot into the mainstream that this is acceptable, And even though I'm not a big fan of hair rock, Guns N' Roses is a little different. But they weirdly enough kind of created a pathway for Metallica, even though Metallica was on a major label and they already had their audience, But the idea of having that as music in the mainstream rock stations, which is weird because it's rock, like you would think, yeah, that's a thing. Motherfuckers, they suppressed Black Flag, and Black Flag was off the chain band, a great fucking band. They thought Sammy Hagar and Van Halen were a great idea. Well, they made a lot of money. Yeah. Piss off, really. Sorry, I side with the David Lee Roth concept. The first wave of the band made complete sense to me. Everything else after that was kind of like, fucking yawn. Right? Mid-'80s music is, in the mainstream sense, was a fucking big fucking yawn. Like, really? We're doing this? This is what you get. Huey Lewis in the News is going to be my Led Zeppelin? The fuck it is, right? That was my thinking, right? So, I know a good way. It's a little sidebar. Any which way, ZZ Top and the anthologies make sense to me. They're the pieces that are curated by the artists, by the families, by the friends, by the people that kind of know. The Butcher aspect of greatest hits compilations are so bad that the litmus, like for the Beatles, for the Elvis, those pop structures that were designed, like I mentioned, in God's Madonna, were experimented with those artists, right? And the Beatles even criticized openly on a cover of an album the butchery it comes with greatest hits albums, right? So the famous compilation album by the Beatles was Yesterday and Today, and it's the Butcher cover, which has them covered in doll parts, because it was a comment on how the American business model was chopping up their material. The Beatles are so dope that they, in their anthology series, they even commented on the idea of being pop made by dressing up, haircuts, matching uniforms. They talk about that process. I know Elvis went through that process. I'm not saying I'm praising Elvis. I have my issues with Elvis. But they both went through the same cycle. This cycle of business, of marketing that exists. The same cycle that would warrant wanting to have a greatest hits album and them dictating what it is. Like Neil Young's famous greatest hits album, it's all based on sales. He had nothing to do with the album. Just a large power grab and money. Whereas anthologies and collections by the artists are different. These anthologies are supposed to be supplementary piece to the collection. If you're a fan, this makes more sense. The greatest hits album is just fucking grazing. It's just the business hand saying, we need to make more money. Let's get the peaks, not the valleys. Not the valleys. Here's what's even more interesting about that. Sometimes the valleys were not respected at the time they came out. And over time, they become more respected. Like the B-side of a 45. Sometimes the B-side sells more than the A-side. It's just how it is sometimes. I'll give you an example of this. Snow, Informa. Most of the album, in my opinion, is trash. Even back in the day when it was released, I didn't like it. However, Lonely Monday Morning is a dope track. It is a structured dub track. It falls in line with a lot of dub releases from the 70s and 80s, right? It's just something to know. So that single was kind of like not necessarily looked at. And it was the B-side of Informer. it really it stands the test of time. Like you can throw that track on a compilation and it kind of works. Interesting. So anyway, which way, this was this episode, and this is how I'm going to end it with simple. I'm not sure how you're reacting to this. And what I said at the beginning of the episode is how I'm going to apply for the future. Next episode will be on lost movies, and you're going to be like, well, I've heard of this movie. Yeah, but numbers and all that shit. Until then, bye.